Welcome everyone to the latest Charity Chats. It's December at the time of recording, but you'll be seeing this in the new year. My name is Rustomji, and I'm joined today by my regular panellists, Charles Mesquita from Quilter Cheviot and James Saunders from Kingston Smith. Whether it's a new year, new you kind of feeling, or just an end of an era, perhaps, I wondered about our thoughts and observations on the year that's gone by, and also issues that might be facing charities in 2023. So I would open that up to whoever feels bravest to launch first with some thoughts on that.
Well, I think the three of us have been having a few email correspondences recently about all the challenges that are facing the sector, and barely a day goes by without a new warning of the next crisis or the ongoing crisis that the sector faces. I mean, clearly a massive underfunding in the sector at the moment. Surveys and feedback this last week or two about how much by how much underfunded the sector is. I mean, quite worrying, really. And from my side as an accountant and auditor, it's to do with going concern and really the viability of charities, many charities, over the course of the next 12 months.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I mean, you're absolutely right. It does feel like we've sort of done about 10 rounds with Mike Tyson over the last 3 years. And there's no doubt about it that energy and resources have been spent to battling with the and adapting to the pandemic and everything that's followed. And I think we're going to be in for another tough year next year, without a doubt. But I also think that actually, trustees are just you just have to think about different ways of doing things and do it. And also, I think we're going to have to say no. I mean, I think about it from a trustee of, hark on about Glasspool, but we're spending 2 million a year to help relieve poverty. Well, the fact is, I'm not going to solve poverty in the UK. Government has got much bigger amounts of money that it spends, but what I do look at is how efficient we are and whether what impact we're having, and are we making the application for grants as easy as possible to get the money as quickly to those that need it. And we've gone through quite a big transformation on that basis, which has led to its own problems. I mean, we're now opening up our grants thing every Monday for about 5 minutes, which has its own issues. So we're having to rethink about how we do that. But I only have a certain amount we can spend, and that defines what we can actually do.
And I don't know about you too, but I felt that earlier this year, I think coming out of the pandemic, there was more positivity for the sector. Those that had survived were doing great things, had adapted, had made changes that they needed to, and were ready to face the future. But at the moment, it just seems to me there's a lot of talking things down, and that confidence is being eroded, and charities are being told almost to hunker down and prepare for the worst. And I just don't know if that's counterintuitive and isn't helpful for trustees to be hearing that.
Yeah, you've got to wonder, Catherine, how many new ideas are left in the locker after the last 3-4 years, and even going before that. Even going back to the 2008-9 period. How many new ideas are left in the locker, and how much more belt tightening can there be? We've been told in the last couple of years that charities have pared their staffing and their operation costs down to the bare bones. Well, if there's more funding cuts and more funding reductions coming up, there's only one end to that story, which is nowhere near enough income to cover the costs of the sector as a whole. So yeah, there comes a point where we've got a lot of strikes going on at the moment in different sectors. Perhaps the charity sector should go on strike and say to government, we're not prepared to do this mopping up anymore of services that you think we should do more efficiently than we are, when we're doing the best we possibly can.
Well, it goes back to that original thing, doesn't it, of where does the welfare state stop and charity start? And it's a debate we don't seem to want to have.
We have it all the time, Charles.
Well, I know we do, but I still think that you're absolutely right. And there have been 1 or 2 charities that their staff have gone on strike. and you have sympathy for them. But there's a real dilemma here, isn't it? Because you feel a complete responsibility to your beneficiaries and you don't want to let them down. But actually, there comes a time when you've just got to say, well, I'm terribly sorry, but we can't be subsidizing government if that is their responsibility, and actually put it back to politicians and say, okay, guys, you've actually, if you know, you've got to make the decision and take the responsibility for that. You know, it shouldn't be left down to the charities to have to, you know, be seen to be the bad guys when actually they're not necessarily the ones who should be funding, or their funding is being cut. So yeah, I'm in massive sympathy for that. But you know, there is only a finite amount of money that could be spent. And I you know, I think that trustees just need to be, you know, go back and focus on what your strategy is, and be very and you know, be mindful about things like mission creep and doing stuff, and just trying to rethink outside the box of, are there things you could be doing differently that actually would have the same effect? And that's quite a difficult thing to do.
And remember, Charles, in, you know, profit in the charity sector is not a dirty word. Things have to be profitable in order to be, and that's in the sense of the charity being able to fulfill its objectives. You know, we can't constantly be loss making on a majority of projects. And I do get that feeling from an awful lot of my clients and contacts who are saying, you know, we are, as you said earlier, we're saying no to what we know we are going to make a loss on, and we're not going to fund those from reserves anymore. One or two projects that we think have strategic relevance, absolutely, but just doing it because there's not enough money, and we, you know, that idea of growth rather than you know, profitability or recoverability. You know, very few bigger charities now, I think, are just going on growth and just you know, hoovering up projects just because, or contracts just because they're there.
Yeah, I think rather than using the word profitability, I think use the word surplus. You know, you can't run something at a loss continuously, because at that point you go back to your going concern issue, don't you?
And I do wonder whether we'll see more charities failing. You know, will they shrink and go back to their core? Will they merge with others? Will they close altogether? I don't know if we will see a bit of a reshaping of the sector generally.
Well, we know that there's definitely an appetite for partnership, much more collaboration. You know, we've done a webinar on this before, and it's really increasing. COVID really brought that to the fore. It made people aware and conscious of quite how much stronger teams are when they work together across charities. You know, mergers is always going to be a difficult subject. We've covered that before, but the partnership approach and the collaboration, very, very strong at the moment. I don't see any sign of that reducing at all, because people have seen the benefits.
I thought it was also quite interesting with the chair of the Charity Commission coming out for a call for the very wealthy should be doing more, and comparing it to the US. I'm not quite sure whether that's actually sidestepping the issue, because even if they did step up and did what they did, it's still not going to really resolve the issue, because it's relatively small amounts. I mean, it's big money, but small amounts of money in the scheme of things.
And it doesn't solve the structural problem, or you know, where the majority of the deficit, if you like, in the sector is because it's fundamentally underfunded for what the services are. We shouldn't be waiting on windfalls from wealthy individuals. I found that a strange one as well.
There were some really positive comments in that speech, but there were other bits that really jarred in terms of the messaging.
And this is always going to be, and I think the point was made, has been made by the Charity Commission themselves. But you know, being the regulator and the main cheerleader is very, very difficult. You know, on the one hand, you've got the stick, and you've got to have the carrot over somewhere. But I mean, it just doesn't sit well at the moment, especially when regulation is so very strict. You know, and that impartiality and independence is just that, you know, you can't get away from it. You can't. So, but that's still going to be addressed at some point.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the new chair is a welcome change to what was there previously, and certainly the tone of what he has been saying, I think, is really encouraging in the respect that he understands the sector. He understands that, you know, trustees are volunteers and actually how much it gives back. But yeah, I mean, you know, that they're effectively funded from government, so there is always going to be a slight issue around that, isn't it? And they've had their funding quite considerably cut over the years. And I think the other thing, sadly, and I don't know how you resolve the issue, but regulation just seems to be going one way, and that to me also is a real dampener on innovation and things. But with all of these things, you get, the interesting thing, isn't it, as this evolves, people then come up from underneath and find different ways of dealing with it and adapting and then coming up with really innovative solutions. So this sort of have this continual evolution going on is quite exciting, and I think we shouldn't forget that that's there and it's happening all the time.
Yeah, and I just think there isn't the appetite to report on that. We don't hear about the great projects and the innovative ideas that people are coming out with. We hear about, we're struggling, we're going to close, it's a crisis, it's always a crisis, and I don't think that helps to label it like that, because I just think that it has that ripple effect through the sector.
Yeah, I think, having said collaboration earlier, collaboration is a real strength. Actually, the collaboration is working on projects together. It's not so much sharing of ideas. Yeah. And that might well be, an area that could improve. Sorry, Charles.
No. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think people need to be open-minded about that. And I think they need to look for the opportunity rather than the reasons not to do something. Now, I was just thinking about climate change. I mean, we've had, COP27 and everything else. And you look at it and everybody looks to governments to be the solution. And in fact, they're not going to be the solution. We're going to be the solution. And everybody is going to have to do something just to contribute towards resolving the issue. Whether that's just making sure when they go to the supermarkets, they complain about how much stuff is wrapped in plastic and how difficult it is to buy things that are not wrapped in plastic, and probably more than once wrapped in plastic. It's whatever it is, but we've all got to do our bits, and charities, I think, are exactly the same. I mean, we're just going through, again, a review of looking about how we're tackling it, not just from, within the organization, but also those people we're engaging with, and can we actively encourage them, not trying to make it a sort of a difficult problem, but encourage them actually to be doing more and moving along with us on the journey, because actually that's going to be an important part of what we do.
I think it's interesting as well to do that as a positive choice rather than a moral crusade. I get really fed up of people trying to make me feel bad about, oh, you've bought this or you do that or you live like, that's not the way to change behaviours, I think. And I think the sector generally should be praised for the volunteers that it has, for the work that it does, rather than ground down. I think the stories lately are very negative about how charities are behaving and whether government is critical of that.
Yeah. And I don't know how you change the understanding either within, politicians or within the general public. And maybe that comes back to charities just need to be better at communicating. And and the problem is, I think there's a difference between communicating a good message and fundraising. And I think the asks are becoming harder and harder and harder because it's becoming more and more competitive. Letters, I mean, you just read them dropping through your letterbox and you just go, and that also becomes a bit fatiguing in the respect, actually, what you want to do is hear a good story, but don't just keep asking me for more and more and more money.
And yet, Charles, I mean, there was just a story, I think only a couple of days ago, Greenpeace have released the number of people who stopped subscribing or stopped donating to them, being subscribers in a particular month. And they said that sort of counterintuitively, it regenerates more subscribers in the period following that, because suddenly people think, and it also helps them engage with those departing fundraisers and new ones as well. It's something to talk about. So actually it regenerates the fundraising efforts. So that, going back to our point about novel ideas and different thinking about things, releasing what purports to be quite negative data, this is the people that we've lost this year or this month or whatever it was, actually they can turn it round into something quite positive.
Yeah. And I think trying to finish on a positive, James and Charles, whether there is a happy thought or a suggestion for trustees, for the sector, about what they could bear in mind for next year. Do you have any gems you'd like to share?
Oh gosh, that's a difficult one.
I wonder if it is partly that kind of, hold your nerve, keep doing what you're doing, try not to be knocked off course. And
I mean, I'm going to give one because it's a market one of, the markets are forward indicators, everybody looking at now and, should we be investing and everything else, or should we be invested? And you go, yeah, but the markets are thinking 9-12 months ahead. And the other thing I always say to people is that, if you're invested and you're getting a 3% income, you're being paid to wait. And so I think trying to think ahead and actually take some time, actually over Christmas or New Year, or if this goes out after that, then you can't do it. But it's just take a step back and just to reflect about all the good things that are going on and all the potential and opportunities out there. There is an awful lot of it. I think you're quite right. I think you can get too much focused on the negatives and forget about actually all the amazing stuff that is happening in society and life and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, the one opportunity that springs to my mind and has done for some time is the opportunity for corporate partnerships and engaging with philanthropists. Having said earlier, it's not down to private individuals. Actually, there is a whole chunk of still relatively new philanthropists, well-meaning, wealthy people who want to do things. They don't just want to give to charity and say, here you go, that's, go and do your good work. They want to be engaged. They want to see the results, the fruits of their labors being, actually putting money into charities, working with them, again, that collaboration, but also working with these newer entrants to the sector. And this means that you've got to sell yourself to them. You've got to show the value that you bring, not just, this is an extreme to make a point, but just don't just stand there with your hand out saying that, we're a charity, please help us. You've got to be recognised. But the more you can sell yourself to those donors, the more you can, show the real benefit you bring to them as well as to your beneficiaries. I think that marks out a slightly different thinking in charities than others.
Yeah. I think, can I just add one thing to that? I think two things I'd say. One is understand what a partnership means, and that is there is an equality there. And the second thing I think is that this is a transaction, I hate to do it in that, where both parties are receiving something for doing something, and being very clear on what the benefits both sides are, and being just completely realistic about what that is, I think really helps to make those partnerships work well.
Great. Thank you both. That's the end of our year. Thank you for listening to this session. I hope you found it useful, interesting, thought-provoking. We love to hear any feedback from you, that whether you disagree with us on things or whether you do endorse what we're saying as well. Would be great to hear your thoughts. We look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thank you.